Okay.
This is just the beginning. That's the world that we live in. Let me help you believe in what we can do when we stand united. We are one with the world. We can make a brighter tomorrow. Together make a change. It's our life. We can't step back from what we know is right. So let's shine our light. Oh, let's shine our light. We won't listen to what they're saying. We know it's just love that we're giving to this place that we call our home. We can't change what's been done, but it's still our run. We are one with the world. We can make a brighter tomorrow. Together make a change. It's our life. We can't step back from what we know is.
Hello, everyone. We're welcome to this second day of Catalyzing Change Week. So we're gathered here today from different scopes of work and life in this inspiring dialogue for ecosystem governance and systems change, hosted by Collaborating for Resilience and partners. And after this sort of introductory video that I'm going to share from Sanjoy Roy, our co-chair of the Collaboration Catalyzing Change Week Planning Committee, I would love to welcome Tarita from the Co-Resilience team to join.
I am Sanjoy Roy, the co-chair of the Catalyzing Change Week Programming Committee. Welcome to Catalyzing Change Week 2024. This is where we'll not just have conversations, but we'll actually see change. We'll see change makers, innovators within the social space. You'll meet government folks and funders. You'll see people who've done excellent good practice that we can learn from. And most importantly, it'll be a place to network, learn, and exchange ideas. So do dive right in to the Catalyzing Change Week 2024 and enjoy the experience. I am Sanjoy Roy, the co-chair of the Catalyzing Change Week program.
Tarita, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Luca. Welcome, everyone, to our session, Inspiring Dialogue for Ecosystem Governance and Systems Change, hosted by Collaborating for Resilience, or CORE for short. My name is Tarita, and I'm the Strategy and Partnerships Fellow at CORE. As we get started with the event, I encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat. You can put in your name, your organization, where you're calling in from, as a way to connect with others and say hello. Before we get started, I wanted to share a bit about our organization, CORE. So we are an international nonprofit working to address resource competition and strengthen governance and livelihood resilience in interconnected resource domains and landscapes. We partner with various civil society and nonprofit organizations working to empower marginalized rural communities, particularly in South and Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Central America. Our work really targets the social, political, and institutional blocks of these systems to effective natural resource management and environmental security. And our overall goal is to create resilient rural livelihoods, regenerative food systems, address climate adaptation issues, and lead to inclusive regional economies. As you might know, this event is focused on multi-stakeholder dialogue to encourage equitable environmental resource governance. So our focus at CORE on multi-stakeholder dialogue really has its roots in a partnership to support community fisheries on the Tonle Sap Lake in Cambodia. And this contributed to regulatory and policy reforms in favor of a network of community fisheries, the broadest such reform effort in Southeast Asia. We've continued to partner with various organizations and partners in different parts of the world, and we've built on these principles of multi-stakeholder dialogue to address the roots of natural resource conflict. Today's dialogue is essentially a part of this effort to build upon these resources and create a cross-regional community of practice, particularly aimed at strengthening the capacity of landscape practitioners working on the ground to address these issues of environmental resource governance. Which is why also at CORE, we've started a program called Banyan Academy, which is essentially inspired by our very successful partnerships with civil society change makers in settings across South and Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Latin America, as I mentioned before. So we really envision Banyan Academy as an initiative that supports civil society coalitions that are addressing various governance gaps for inclusive landscape governance and rural livelihood resilience. Essentially, we believe that complex, interconnected challenges require integrated responses to enable enduring change in social ecological systems. And civil society organizations really serve as critical intermediaries amongst community, government, and private sector actors, hence also multi-stakeholder dialogue being at the forefront of our work. So we are really working to develop this network that is also co-created and guided by a core group of leading civil society organizations. Each of them are grounded in their national and local context and are working with local communities and indigenous populations to ensure there are equitable rights and resource distribution. This session is just another step towards this vision, and hopefully will bring together different actors from different parts of the world provide an opportunity for us to identify new partners, but also hopefully for you to find new people or new organizations and partners to collaborate with. Before I introduce our speakers, I want to go over a couple quick housekeeping about Zoom etiquette as such before we get started. If possible, please keep your video on. It's always great for the speakers to be able to see other people's faces and see your reactions. Please rename yourself to your name and your organization. There are instructions on how to do so in this slide. And like I mentioned earlier, please introduce yourself in the chat as well. Please keep yourself muted unless we call upon you to ask a question. We will have a short Q&A session as well during our event. And so for that, also in preparation for that, please continue to put in any comments, questions, thoughts in the chat as we move through the event, and we'll make sure to address these during our Q&A session. And during that time, we will likely call upon you to unmute yourself and ask your question. Okay, so now on to our incredible speakers for today's panel. Each of today's speakers has really rich experience to share. First, we have Swapna Sarangi. She's a team leader with the Foundation for Ecological Security based in the state of Odisha in India. She supports local communities to improve governance of the ecological commons, land, water, and forests, and liaises with government authorities to leverage public funds for landscape restoration. Our next speaker is Hippolyte Poole. He's the Executive Director of Institute for Peace and Development based in Ghana. His organization is dedicated to research, praxis, monitoring, and evaluation that bridge the fields of conflict assessment, analysis, peace building, and sustainable development. Finally is John Recha, who is a climate researcher with the CGIAR based in Kenya, and his work focuses on actions to develop climate resilient food systems. He is also a key facilitator for the Kenya Landscape Actor Partnerships, or KenLAP for short, and it is essentially a coalition of landscape partnerships across Kenya, uniting to advocate for sustainable development and integrated landscape management policies. I also want to briefly introduce our moderator, Blake Ratner, who is also the founder and executive director of Collaborating for Resilience. He is an advisor to the scientific and technical advisory panel of the Global Environment Facility and past Director General of World Fish. He has 3 decades of experience leveraging the role of multi-stakeholder dialogue in environmental governance. Blake, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thanks very much, Tarita, Luca, for that wonderful welcome. And it's really exciting to be hosting this event because our aim really is in line with the expectations of Catalyst 2030, and that we're aiming to identify new connections, new partnerships that emerge out of this. As Tarita mentioned, the vision of Banyan Academy really is a growing global network of partners. And it's one that's focused on, as Tarita said, these enduring challenges of environmental governance. And I think it's striking with the panelists that we have here today, just to make a few comments about how urgent and pressing these challenges are. John in Kenya was just relaying how they are fighting now historic flooding that is understood to be linked to climate change. In India, at the moment, there is extreme heat waves, particularly in the Northeast, 45 degrees Celsius and above for extended periods. In Ghana, where Hippolyte is based, there are long-standing conflicts over land, and more broadly in the West African region around conflicts between herders and farmers over a changing landscape, among others. So these are issues that are by no means theoretical. They're really about the heart of livelihoods, of the possibilities for achieving equity and decent, sustainable development in many, many parts of the world, and indeed in ways that affect us all. So we're going to be touching upon issues of strategies to address these challenges of environmental governance, challenges that emerge in implementing these strategies, and lessons that can be drawn from that. And so I really want to begin with Swapna to give us a sense briefly of what is one strategy that you're using in the Indian context to address environmental governance.
Thank you, Blake, for this wonderful opportunity to be able to share our story. Like you said, yes, climate is affecting all of us in some way or other. So the coastal state, the eastern state where I belong to, in the Odisha context, we have been a very favorite child of climate disasters. Every year we get either some cyclone or heat waves, and then drought, and all this has been frequently visiting the state of Odisha. So there is a growing demand for looking at how we share these ecological or shared natural resources by the local communities and prepare them well to become more resilient to this kind of a climate disaster. So the strategy that we designed and started working is that we realized that we as an organization cannot really bring about a change, and we need to move beyond us and look at many other actors who are part of the system and can contribute in whatever capacity they can. So we designed a multi-actor kind of a process where we invited civil society organizations, government, academic people, people from the media house, people from variety kind of a background, who in somewhere or other were keen on looking for a solution for this climate issues that was growing in the state. And then we started talking to each other about how can we really come up with a solution to reverse this impact of the climate change that is happening by protecting and managing and somewhere restoring the common natural resources like the forest, the water bodies, the mangroves, the coastal commons, all of that. The I think in the last 2-3 years that we have been talking to each other, we could manage now to come up with a larger agenda for the state, where we are now working towards for a secured commons for more climate resilient action, where we could also talk about livelihood opportunities and ecosystem services. So it is just not for the human beings that we want to talk. We are also bringing in all other life forms that is there and getting affected by this. And in this entire journey, what has been really, really encouraging is the participation of with different kind of understanding of the situation, problem, and their contribution and the solution that they bring in. But all of us jointly has been talking to each other, navigating through this process together to come up with some kind of a pathway where we could really somehow contribute to come up with a state policy around governing and managing the common resources. So in this, you have seen, in this what has been encouraging also to see a variety of actors in their own sphere trying to contribute. So there are people from the media, there are people from the legal bodies, there are people from the academic institutions, there are civil society organizations, there are community-based organizations, there are community representatives who are there in this entire dialogue. And yeah, I think we have been able to at least been able to figure out the pathway as to how we want to do, who all are the actors that needs to be engaged with, who all are the ones who can help us in really taking this forward, the dialogue, and also the challenges that possibly can come in our way. So this is where we are at present, I would say.
Excellent. Thanks, Swapna. And we'll come back to you on those very challenges. I want to go to John next. John, the Kenya Landscape Actors Platform, I imagine is, like Swapna mentioned, also trying to bring together quite a variety of actors. Could you tell us a little bit about the strategy that you're employing?
Yes, the Kenya Landscape Actors Platform does seek to coordinate landscape actors in Kenya to work together for productive and resilient landscapes, to secure food, secure biodiversity, equitable livelihoods, and also sustainable investments. Now, one strategy that has worked in the Kenyan context is knowledge sharing and learning that does take place between these different landscapes. And by the types of landscapes in Kenya that we have, I mean, we have, for example, the forest lands in the country. We also have mountains and hills, the Mount Kenya, the Mount Elgon, Kilimanjaro, struggled across the country. We also have rangelands where 75% of the country is either arid or semi-arid, and that's the area that has got lots of pastoralism. Then there are farmlands where there's more or less crop production or mixed farming. And then there are the huge water bodies because we border the Indian Ocean and has got the coastal belt, which is full of the mangroves, for example. Now, these key landscapes face challenges I'll talk about altogether. However, the strategy that has helped in promoting and scaling governance innovation in the country has been the facilitation of knowledge sharing, learning, and exchange platforms. The Kenya Landscape Actors Platform is one of them, which is anchored and recognized by the Ministry of Environment, Climate Change, and Forestry. So through facilitating knowledge sharing amongst communities and different actors, and by these stakeholders, I mean those who are in these landscapes. Some of them, for example, around forest lands are in the so-called community forest associations. Those which are around game parks and game reserves and rangelands have got the so-called community conservation association. Those which are in the coastal belt have got like the mangrove conservation association or the fisheries associations. Now, these get a chance to exchange knowledge and learning in meetings that take place in the geographical area, and then through documentation, the best practices are documented, and then now this is passed on to other communities that have got similar agroecology, similar landscape, and also similar challenges, so that they end up learning from it. And of course, with an enabling environment put in place by the stakeholders, including government agencies, non-government organizations, and the private sector, we have had a robust environment for innovative governance to ensure there is natural resource management and fostering of cross-sectoral collaboration amongst all these landscapes. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, John. That helps set up the conversation well in terms of the challenges that you're organizing around. Now, Hippolyte, so far, John and Swapna have talked about the importance of multiple actors, the challenges around knowledge sharing and exchange, but we haven't heard a lot yet about kind of the deeper conflicts that can emerge in these landscapes. And I know that's a particular focus of your organization, Institute for Peace and Development. What is your sense about key strategies that work to address these challenges?
Thanks, Blake. Land ownership usage in all of Africa, particularly in West Africa, is highly contested. Highly contested because lands hardly have demarcations. I know in my village that my family has land. I don't know how much of it belongs to my family because it's not documented, it's not demarcated. You know, there are competing interests from private families, communities, chiefs, and the state, who wants to grab as much land as possible. And then you have private people coming in, either for land for agriculture, for real estate, and so forth. You know, that complicates matters. You know, if I look especially to the broader West Africa, you find that all of these are compounded by climate change, which is pushing people in marginal areas like Burkina Faso, the Sahel, downwards into the more coastal forested areas. So there's increased conflict between herders and farmers, you know, increased competition for natural resources in the communities, and all of these are generating conflicts. Now, the question is, how do you manage this for the common good? One solution that we have used and tested out is, again, to go back to John's point about multi-actor platform, but this time focusing on using community-based approaches as well, so that the communities begin to have a sense of ownership of the land, you know, by having their lands registered. But that required the influence at the state level to get legislation changed so that it can empower communities to have that right to register their land. And that was a very tricky part. When we come to discussing challenges, I will raise some of those issues. But we did manage in Liberia, for instance, to get the legislation changed so that the definition of land ownership includes community land ownership, includes family land ownership, and above all, creates space for women and young people who until now didn't have rights of ownership, can now have rights of ownership of land. And we've seen this happen in Mali, in Burkina Faso, Niger, and in Liberia, Sierra Leone. So using that collective approach of bringing government decision makers, members of parliament, politicians, you know, civil society organization leaders, and community actors together to jointly discuss the issues about land and find ways to address that is critical. And that has been one critical piece of the success that we have seen going forward in the management of communal resources. Thank you, Blake.
Excellent. Thanks, Hippolyte. Swapna, as Hippolyte talks about that connection between the community level, organization around land management and the policy level. I wonder how that resonates with your experience in Orissa in India, because you were just mentioning that you've also been working on policy level change.
Yeah, I think also we need to understand that land is becoming a finite resource, and the contestation on the land is growing everywhere, because there are multiple actors who would like to have a piece of land for some purpose which is not going to be aligning to each other's thought. So anytime we talk about anything to do with land, it's always a very, very difficult zone to work with. And I think the growing tension also is a kind of development path that we have chosen for ourselves. We want to have economic focused development initiatives, which requires a kind of resource which is becoming scarce day by day. So in that context, the communities which are dependent on these resources for their survival, for their basic need, for their livelihoods, come in directly to a context where there is other needs that is growing. In that kind of a situation, it becomes a very, very difficult situations to navigate with it kind of discussions. But with growing climate concern, I think somewhere there is at least a discussion has started. How do you need to keep how much of a land for the purpose of conserving and for the purpose of giving some kind of answer to the impact of the climate. So the climate issues has somehow opened up some kind of a dialogue with all the kind of actors possible on the ecosystem, where they're all getting to see the need for conserving some kind of a landmass to be able to really, really navigate through these difficult times. So that's said and done is really easy, but to be able to bring people together on a board on a table to discuss about it, to talk about a proper judicious land use pattern, to talk about community rights and their ability to govern these resources, to talk about government stand on these resources, to talk about government's mandate around these shared resources is a difficult task. But with long-term association with communities, with building evidence and building more scientific kind of a informations built around these systems and how have they been contributing positively to the impact of climate change, I think is helping us to build our case somewhere. That if you conserve these resources, how are they fulfilling your SDG goals? How are they helping your climate goals? How are they providing alternative livelihoods to the communities who otherwise would suffer of a climate-induced disaster? So these are narratives which is helping us to be able to build this kind of dialogue with the state. And then all other actors in the platform that we have, there is a legal entity which is also taking use of the legal provisions. There are media groups who are talking and putting these informations on public domain, initiating a dialogue around these resources. So this kind of a prolonged strategy, I think, is working where we are getting governments to also now start thinking and talking about it.
Right. I'm really interested, Swapna, that you mentioned, these kind of what I would think of as incentives. What are the factors that motivate different actors to come together to address these landscape challenges? And you referred to kind of the long-standing relationship with communities that helps build your own legitimacy, as well as the ways in which you're connecting to other elements of the policy agenda that governments are already committed to. John, how about in your experience? What are the things that help bring in actors that might otherwise be reluctant to join these collaborative efforts?
Yes, the main thing we have in Kenya is resource degradation, the continued degradation of natural resources, such as deforestation to expand agricultural land, soil erosion, especially in areas which are hilly, and then there is water pollution in the lakes, the Lake Victoria, and even towards the Indian Ocean, and even the river that we have. Then loss of biodiversity that is growing as areas which are under executive land or pastoralism, livestock keeping is expanding. These have exacerbated the existing environmental challenges that have impacts on reducing food and nutrition security, and have forced people to come into groups and partner with like-minded stakeholders and work with the government to be able to do something for their survival. Now, what has triggered even more of these actions is the current ongoing impact of climate change, where we are witnessing the increasing climate variability and extreme weather events of droughts, like these semi-arid areas we talked about, which is 100% of the country. Some of them had 1 or 2 years without rainfall. And then when rains came, like this year, it's massive.
Right.
Whatever stock that has remained altogether has been washed away, most of it with floods, either affected by the other extreme event of the flooding and extreme event of the drought. And we just survived a cyclone that was coming, but somehow it weakened upon moving towards the coastline of Kenya. So these exacerbate pressure on natural resources, leading to heightened vulnerability. And this vulnerability is what is forcing people to get into actions. Now, we still have a twofold challenge around the actions, because first of all, there is some little bit of weak institutional capacity and inadequate resources from agencies. There's some efforts by the government, but there's room for improvement, and where sometimes the regulatory bodies sometimes hinder effective implementation and enforcement of environmental policies and specific natural resource governance frameworks. And then, of course, related to that is some kind of fragmentation and lack of coordination among the stakeholders. For example, areas which are under conservation for the game parks and game reserves in Kenya, those are areas which basically the government says they're out of bounds by the people. But the pastoral communities which have been staying in neighboring areas, when they are faced with drought and right now the flooding, they take refuge in taking their livestock here for grazing. And of course, as per their culture, they are not out to decimate the wildlife, but simply to have pasture for their livestock. Then areas which are under the Kenya Forest Service, for example, because they're under trees, there is regulation that they should not be interfered with. But there are people who stay around there who need to access firewood for cooking. And all that they need are the dead trees. But accessing becomes a challenge. So because of that, there's sometimes overlapping mandates and conflicting priorities lead to these inefficiencies in dealing with the challenge. Thank you very much.
Interesting. Thanks, John. So I presume that you're working to aid government to kind of recognize these overlapping rights and the way to reflect that in terms of formal legal recognition.
Exactly. That's what the Kenya Landscape Actors platform is seeking to also influence in the policy and advocacy agenda.
Okay, thanks, John. Hey, but let me come back to you, because you had mentioned about the importance of reflecting community priorities and land rights and in state level policy change. But in the region that you're working, clearly there are a lot of barriers as well to making that happen. Can you speak a bit about those and how you've been addressing them?
So the first barrier is that the interest in land and its usage are not mutually exclusive between the different groups. What has always been lacking is a space for them to sit down and talk and say, what is that we can do? What are our common interests? And how do we work together to achieve those common interests? No. But once you start to create that space, then the membership of that space becomes an important factor as well. In cases where governments have been seen with suspicion by the communities and the way they have behaved, it's very difficult for communities to accept that they can work with governments to address an issue that government has a stake in. They perceive government, for instance, as being the ones that was facilitating land grab by the private sector, or even government agents, government officials were grabbing land for themselves. So how would community members agree to come and sit with government and talk about this? But the facilitating role that civil societies created, and the inclusive nature of the process gave confidence to groups that this is really going to work, because once they begin to see the potentials for benefits that will accrue, then they begin to say, okay, can we work together? Can we work together and get this happening? Of course, the government initially will be very skeptical about this working together, but they tagged along because the initiatives were funded by major donor agencies that were funding government. So the government felt that, okay, look, we need to tag along just so we can guarantee access to the resources from the World Bank, USAID, and all the other big people. They probably didn't expect that the change that the communities were pushing would happen. But it did happen because the communities and civil societies recognized very important entry points that they took. For instance, in Liberia, there was a phase in which there was a government in transition. There was a change over from one government to the next, a different political party to the next. And the civil society organization quickly realized that if they slotted in the policy change agenda, the legal reforms that were already ongoing, if they could push it very hard at the beginning of the new government's tenure, they could get it passed. And that's what they did. They pushed it, the new government, without thinking seriously about it, passed the legislation, and then now they say, oh, we lost control over the land. So the resistance is now coming from the government side to try to slow down the processes of actually turning over land ownership to the communities. So you said there's a yin-yang affair in the whole land management process, and you need to be very smart in recognizing what is the opportune moment, to take this. In Niger and Burkina Faso, they didn't go to the level of legislation change, but communities working together, realized that, hey, we have a lot more in common than when we are divided. So herders, for instance, found out that when they worked together with the sedentary communities to develop pasture lands and farmlands, they didn't have to go too far away with our cattle during the dry season to find food. They could find all the crop residue within the community to feed their livestock. And the farmers benefited from the increased dumping of cow manure in the communities. So that symbiotic relationship that emerged strengthened the need for greater collaboration, and people began to see that this is possible. So yes, there were challenges, but you have to find the opportune moments to get in there and propose a solution and get things to work. So that's what I can say for now. We can contribute later more. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Hippolyte. And I just want to call out a couple of the key phrases that you mentioned as you were explaining that context, that you talked about the facilitative role of civil society. And I think that really gets to the heart of the kind of exchange we're trying to build beyond this conversation in the Banyan Academy network that Tarita was introducing at the beginning of this dialogue, because it really is about finding those niches in which there's opportunity for maneuver to influence government, to make, as you were saying, Hippolyte, connections to other players, including at the international level, that can help to support policy change at the national level, and to identify and pursue what you described as these opportunities for a symbiotic relationship that can move beyond existing conflicts. So I think those are really key points to hold on to. What I want to do is open it up a bit to those who are on the line. If you have questions for the panelists, or if this conversation sparks a particular reaction or comment on your side, please raise your hand. You can use the raise hand function on Zoom, And if it's not showing up, there's a button that says the 3 dots, more, and I think you might be able to find it there. But also just come on screen so that we can see you, and I'll call upon you as well. Anyone who'd like to come in at this stage? Maybe as we're waiting for others to formulate their questions, Swapna, if I can come back to you on this theme of working in what are frankly difficult governance contexts that we've been talking about. What have you found about some of these opportunities to build, as Hippolyte was referring to, the symbiotic relationship or synergies in places where you might not have expected them before?
Yeah, I think one opportunity that has come in recent years of this new policy in India called Forest Right Act, which was there since 2006, where there was a provision for giving community rights over the forest resource that they have been protecting and governing. But from 2006 to 2015-16, we didn't really see a lot of momentum happening around that. But with many people joining hands together, started interacting with each other, and then reaching out to the people in the system itself, to the government itself, to make sure that the community gets the legal rights over these resources by using the provision. And there has been many work happened around that. There have been researchers who did a lot of research connecting, if they give this kind of rights to the community, what will happen. There has been media who has been highlighting the need for this kind of a rights to be given to the communities. Civil society actors across country has been voicing their concern about the need for giving the community the rights over these resources. So altogether, I think has worked well. And now we see many governments coming up forward and started interacting and taking the help of civil society organizations to work together. Like in the case of Odisha, right now there is a entire state government initiated program to ensure that the entire state becomes Forest Right Act compliance in next couple of years, where they have onboarded civil society organizations. They have created an entire ecosystem to actually translate the act into the piece of action, so that each and every individual or community who is entitled to get right using this provision of this act should be getting that kind of a right over those resources. So this is pretty much a positive thing that has happened. And we also see similar initiatives starting in Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, all these places where you see traditional groups, tribal groups and indigenous communities has been protecting these resources over a long years of their lives. And now they're getting this right over these resources to be able to manage on their own, govern these resources, and create more economic opportunity out of these resources. So, but this, like I said, these are things which is happening and giving this hope that there is a possibility of multiple actors joining and doing something really great work for ensuring that the communities at the grassroots level, the communities who are the real custodian of these resources, getting the willful right over these resources. And this has happened in bits and pieces in Maharashtra. This has happened in Rajasthan. Gujarat is initiating this process. So one by one, states are waking up to this. Examples getting created in another state, learning from each other's experience, and civil society and all other actors are joining together. But the challenge still remains. This is anyway when I'm talking about all these actors, they all come from different power points. They all come from different power positions. So to be able to create that space of bringing them as equals and continuing with the momentum of this kind of a networking and dialogue, this is a real difficult thing to do so. So, and then like I think John talked about getting the resources to continue with this kind of initiative over a period of time, because all this will not happen in a day's time. All this will not, it will take time. It will have its own course of life. So how do we continue with this momentum? How do we ensure that you get some kind of a short-term milestone achieved so that people in the coalition feel like being part of the coalition because they could see something happening. They could see something getting achieved. So these challenges are still there, but I think what has worked is the way we designed it. That we didn't really we have a very long term kind of a goal where world will look really really beautiful, but to be able to reach to that place, we have created these small little milestones, and with every achievement, I think we have been able to move little closer to the final dream that we have.
Excellent. Thanks, Swapna. And I think as you describe that kind of momentum building and similar sorts of efforts happening across multiple states, really there you were talking about systems change at scale. And I see in the chat that Julia, who works on the side of connecting partners and funders around big systems change initiatives, is mentioning the relevance for that challenge. I notice also we've got Rakesh Rajani on the line, who is one of the key movers behind the initiative that you're describing, Swapna, at least one of the key supporters and friendly challengers of the Promise of Commons initiative in its design stage that we worked with. Rakesh, if you would like to come on and share your perspectives on these challenges, I'd welcome that as well. We also have a question from Rajib. Rajib, would you like to come on camera and share your question, please?
Hello. Well, good evening,
yes,
everyone. Myself, Rajiv Mohanty, working in Foundation for Ecological Security, Raipur, Chhattisgarh. So my question is that what I felt in Chhattisgarh and with my other experiences, that conservation entrepreneurship may be one of the key word in the recent future. So in that context, my query is that how the community-driven indigenous knowledge can complement to our initiative, the customs, the tribal morals, and a holistic view. Any example? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rajib. Hippolyte or John, would you like to respond to that about the role of indigenous knowledge in these processes? John.
Yes, I can start. The role of indigenous knowledge has been useful in like 3 communities in Kenya. The coastal community, which is on the coastline of Kenya to the Indian Ocean, has known the usefulness of the mangroves, for example. And when now the multinational companies have been cutting them down for having huge plantations, the local community has come in to be able to educate them. And right now, there is actually a drive by the government of Kenya, and there is recently a law put in place that one day, 10th of October this year onwards, is going to become the Environment Day in Kenya, where tree planting must be done by everyone. But the initiative began 2 years ago because of that momentum by the local community using indigenous knowledge to be able to protect the coastline. Then secondly, the livestock keepers in Kenya in the arid and semi-arid lands, which comprise 75 to 80% of the country, have had these indigenous livestock management processes that have helped them to not to be able to conserve some specific species of grass and even shrubs. These pastoral tribes like the Maasai have been instrumental. And for a long time, there has been a drive like for them to end up having one kind of breed type of a cow, for example. But they have stuck to their guns and said, we need to have some diversification and some of the resilient indigenous breeds of cows. Now, during the dry seasons, they're the ones that survive. During the floods, they're the ones that are capable of withstanding the diseases and the pests, for example, and these other diseases. So what is emerging is the pastoral communities and coastal communities in Kenya have been useful in that. And therefore, what the government is doing now as a lesson learned is more community empowerment through participatory approaches when they're working in those areas, and then knowledge in capacity building through either education services or services where there is kind of training towards more stewardship of these natural resources to promote sustainable management in those communities and agroecologies. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, John.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for your question, Rajib. I hope that was helpful as well. Clearly, the experience that you're involved in, along with Swapna in India, is also generating some important examples about not only integrating indigenous knowledge, but I think putting the emphasis on the legal recognition of tribal rights around forests, forest management in particular, also pasture lands and water management. Okay, so we're coming close to the end of our session. We want to give each of our panelists a chance to give kind of a final thought in terms of lessons or key takeaways from your experience. And so, Hippolyte, I want to turn to you first. What are the key lessons you draw from your experience in addressing work towards improving environmental governance?
Thanks, Blake. I think the key lesson that I draw links to the question you just asked John before in terms of indigenous knowledge system. You know, one of the things that we forget, at least when we speak it from a Western perspective, is that land in most parts of Africa is not a chattel that you can dispose of, you can sell. Land does not belong to me. It belongs to the dead, the living, and the unborn. So it becomes a sacred property that has to be guarded and protected. And in that sense, when communities see their lands taken away by the government, by the private sector, and by and then in the process of their usage, destroy some of the places that they consider really as sacred groves, it hurts them a lot. You know, so when you are able to evoke that idea that they can participate in the protection of their land by owning it and protecting it and working it, then there's a greater interest for them to come in there and be part and parcel of it. So the great lesson is, how do you evoke that communal ownership of land, you know, beyond the present into the future and the past? How do you invoke that as a way to preserve the land, to take care of it, to manage it, you know, because communities really see the land as an asset that is entrusted to them, and they are stewards. They're living as stewards of the land. They are holding in trust on behalf of the dead and the unborn. And those are critical factors that people value. You know, when you begin to talk about land, that it's not just about somebody signing a piece of paper and say, "I've sold the land." For them, land doesn't get sold that way. So you have to be able to reflect and go deeper into their values, the values that underscore that conceptions of land ownership, that conceptions of land usage, that conception of land management. Those have been brought into the discourse. And that's why the traditional customs and traditions on land ownership were so critical in Liberia, for instance, and also in Burkina Faso and Niger, in how communities came together to accept the land management. And they wanted to make sure that those values are preserved. And in Liberia, the law had to make provision for that, to recognize those rights. And I think those are key things that we need to understand. Communities have values, you know, that go beyond the present future generation. There are values that run deep and that are required to be respected and preserved in the management of land. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Hippolyte. John, your closing thoughts in a minute.
Yes. In Kenya, there is the 1/3 gender rule. One lesson we've learned is gender mainstreaming. Gender and social inclusion, where you integrate gender perspectives that promote women's participation and leadership, as well as the youth, and addressing any gender and social inequalities in access to resources and decision-making have been proven to be critical for inclusive outcomes in natural resource management. And I think this is something that we need to integrate and keep institutions moving forward for sustainability. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, John. And Swapna, your closing thoughts or lessons.
I think I agree to what Ippolit and John has been sounding said right now. It has to be community as stewards needs to be recognized. Community as stewards, when I'm saying, and when I'm saying community, it definitely means giving a greater attention to the gender diversity inclusion part of it. You can't just put a blanket saying it's only the one sect of the group will get that kind of a acceptance. Bringing in the other diversity that is there in our social systems, either on the basis of age, caste, creed, gender, all of that, putting together and looking at the intersectionality that is there and ensuring that community is regarded as stewards. And then the second lesson, I think, is one we need to now realize that this is the only planet that we have, and it needs to be protected and saved for all of us to be able to survive and see our generation after generation people to be able to live a healthy life. For that, the mantra is not I, but we. It can't be anymore saying that I will be able to make a change. I'll be able to do and bring about a change. Neither civil society organizations, neither government or any other actor will be able to do it on their own. So the only way of doing it is that we collaborate, we partner, and we co-create solutions. As long as we move in that direction, we become partners in the truest sense, we collaborate in the truest sense, and we really look for a solution, start co-creating solutions. I'm sure we'll be able to reverse the impact that is impacting all of us and create a better world for the generation next.
Very well said, Swapna. Thanks so much. And we're just about at the end of this session. We're going to turn it over to Tarita to share about how you can be in touch to be able to express your interest in the ongoing network around sharing experiences to address the challenges of environmental resource governance. I think what stood out to me today is the theme around the shared values that need to be front and center in the process, particularly from community perspectives, the way that gender and social inclusion is not only an added benefit, but an integral element of achieving equitable resource governance, the importance of civil society convening and how that can make linkages across different levels, including to the policy and governance level. And finally, I think what we're demonstrating, the value of being able to share knowledge and experience around these strategies in ways that can help others in very different contexts. So Tarita, with that, over to you.
Thank you, Blake. Of course, this session, a lot of it was learning about how these aspects of multi-stakeholder dialogue are working out, how it's playing out in the field on the ground in different communities, and really seeing the impact of how it's leading to different avenues of systems change or leading to behavior change, and also in creating enabling environments for policy reformulations, both at local and national levels. But beyond that, also this event, the goal of this dialogue session was to also create those new connections and potential partnerships amongst the people who are joining, listening in, and amongst with CORE as well, as we grow our network of CSO practitioners. To that end, we invite you to connect with CORE and join this growing community of practitioners, of which, of course, our lovely panelists are a part of. And they're already doing some great work to implement pathways to systems change and improve the overall governance landscape for environmental resource management. As you've already heard, there are a lot of key takeaways in terms of strengthening the voices of or just strengthening the issues of gender equity, making sure Indigenous voices are also heard and have autonomy or just a voice in how these resources are managed. So this work really continues to happen through Banyan Academy, through CORE's continuing programs in India and other parts of the world, especially in Central America. Southeast Asia and across Africa. So our network of CSOs is constantly growing, and we encourage you to email us at partner@coresilience.org. I'm also putting that in the chat over here for all of you to access, and hopefully please feel free to reach out and we can find ways to either partner, collaborate, and continue to grow this network. So I look forward to hearing from all of you. And thank you, of course, for joining us and listening to our panelists share their incredible experience with us.
Thanks very much, all.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hope to be in touch. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.